Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast by Bangalore International Centre, bringing you conversations that move, inform, and encourage discourse.
When the fires came in 2016, police cases were made out against the gangs. And even now, just last week, I was telling someone about my book and they said, oh my God, there are so many gangs. Deonar was known for its gangs. But I met them. I don't take away. They may or may not have lit the fires. I certainly don't say that they played a very wonderful role there or anything. But by the same token, the only thing I will say is that they were also trying to fill a gap in administration. They were also symbolic of that. There are all kinds of police cases made out against them, including appropriating the waste dump, physically just taking parts of it away, breaking down the boundary wall, bringing illegal waste there, which also causes health hazards, bringing in cement so that gets mixed up with waste. So now incinerating waste becomes very difficult when there's concrete, cement mixed into it, metal mixed into it. There are even cases of intimidation, and we see Jahangir himself being intimidated by gangs when he was young.
All of Mumbai's memories and castaway possessions come to die at the Deonar garbage mountains. Among these vast, teetering piles of discarded things, medical waste, rotten food, old clothes, broken glass, and twisted metal, a small, forgotten community lives and works. Scouring the dump for whatever can be resold or recycled, waste pickers also mark the familiar milestones of babies born, love found, illnesses suffered, and recovered from. Like a mirror image, their stories are shaped by the influx of unwanted things from the world outside. But now, as Deonar's toxic halo becomes undeniable, a change is coming. And as officials try to close it, the lives that the pickers have built on the mountain seem more fragile than ever. In this episode of BIC Talks, author of Mountain Tales, Love and Loss in the Municipality of Castaway Belongings, Saumya Roy, and V. Ravichandar, full-time champion of lost causes and honorary director of Bangalore International Centre, delve deep into the process of writing this powerful and delightful book about people who are trapped in the gravitational force of a garbage mountain in Mumbai, centered around a deeply moving love story with unforgettable characters while also illuminating a country and a culture. Now, over to Ravi.
Thank you, Lekha. Congratulations, Saumya, on a heart-rending book, Mountain Tales, Love and Loss in the Municipality of Castaway Belongings. This is a narrative that operates at two levels. The protagonist, Farzana, and the many poor and marginalized folks whose lives and livelihoods revolve around the garbage and debris mounds. Some of them are 18 floors high and spread over 326 acres in Deonar, Mumbai. Clearly a case of a mountain and its invisible people hiding in plain sight. And there is another narrative, which is a telling commentary on urbanization, overconsumption, and the way our urban waste is managed using the Deonar landfill as a placeholder. So, Saumya, let's start at the very beginning. You ran a microfinance lending institution, Vandana Foundation, and chance led you to Mountain High at Deonar, finally resulting in this book. In fact, I was struck by a profound insight from one of your microfinance customers when you asked them about viability of repaying the loan. I think she says in Marathi, will garbage ever reduce? I think that would be a pretty deep insight to reply to a venture capitalist today. So the question is, what prompted you to chronicle the lives of these speakers and the larger question it raises?
Thanks so much for having me, Ravi, and to be talking to you about this. I know you've been thinking about these issues for a long time, trying to do something about so many of these issues that plague our cities for a long time. So it's an absolute pleasure and a privilege to be speaking to you about this. I must say that unlike you, I kind of stumbled onto it in the sense that I used to be a journalist for many years, and then I started this non-profit micro finance or livelihoods related nonprofit. And so we used to give loans to a whole bunch of, street vendors and people like that in Mumbai. At one point, we began getting waste pickers from Deonar. I mean, I had heard about this place, like we all hear about this place somewhere marginally, these kind of places that exist at the edge of most Indian cities, and they are kind of rising and smelling, but they are only marginally there in our consciousness. So it was the same with me. And then at one point, when these waste pickers began coming to us, then I thought, well, what kind of business is this? How are you going to repay us if you are only picking waste with your hands, sorting it and reselling it? That's when she told me, ki kachra kadi kami honar ka, like, do you think waste is ever going to reduce? This is an amazing industry that I'm in. We get gold here, we get silver here, we get like metal, copper that comes in, like gadgets that people are using now, all of these things. So actually our business is like growing and it's never going to stop growing. So I could employ people to collect waste and become a trader instead of a waste picker. And so that's how I began going there. And she was not wrong. It was true that it was like, just as the wealth of the city was growing, in Mumbai was becoming wealthier, we were consuming more. This place was also getting a lot of broken up gadgets. Earlier there was just food, but you could see the wealth of the city reflected in the garbage dump, whether it was like better kinds of flooring, better kinds of more fast food, more plastic, more styrofoam. It became a reflection of our society, how we live, how we consume, how we earn, and what we consider important and valuable. And that is what attracted me to this story.
So, in fact, Saumya, when you talk about it, I mean, at one level, clearly there is this whole livelihood opportunity for the poor and the marginalized. But there is another part which is coexisting with it, which is really the moral question that arises, that a city of 25 million, kind of an out of sight, out of mind, their collective waste are dumped in these landfills, which subsequently become toxic. We'll come to that later. I mean, they could be leachate, and it actually kills the community around it at another level and the associated health hazards that arise. So you have these two things coexisting. It does provide a livelihood to these people, but it's at that border of what's legal and what's illegal, and we'll come to that again. And at the same time, it's seriously damaging to the community. So how did you get your head around this particular dilemma of both livelihood and the moral dilemma associated with what's happening to that local community from the waste of 25 million people?
As a writer, I've only reflected on that dilemma. Like, I've only shown it. I don't think that I have a resolution for it. It's certainly something that I saw, I noticed, and I felt every day in their lives, that their lives were just completely enmeshed with garbage. So on the one side, there was that ephemeral hope that, oh, we are going to find something that's just going to lift our fortunes and we are going to be wealthy on trash. But both at an individual level, like, we know that how is poverty alleviated. Sometimes, there are these short-term things, like, say, like a short-term, what do you say, band-aid, like microfinance, or this dream that we are going to find this amazing thing that came in trash and get wealthy. But actually, we know that over a period, that alleviating poverty is not a short-term thing. It is a long-term thing that requires many different things other than just, that the band-aid of a small loan. But this is the dream that the waste pickers had, that whatever life they have is built by this. And children, grandchildren, we certainly had 3 generations. And so to say that it did not build their lives and families is not fair. In a way, it's oral history, right? So they certainly had also good memories that they wanted to talk about, happy memories that they wanted to talk about. And I wanted to show that as well. It would not be fair not to show that. But at the same time, although they did not talk about it, it was also clear that waste was just sickening them. Like I said, at least 2 of the smaller characters in the book died while writing the book of tuberculosis. Most of the characters in this book did suffer from tuberculosis, asthma, eye trouble, cuts, bruises, accidents, right? But it was not something that they talked about very easily, because that was their life. Like, how could you continue to work if you accepted that this was causing this? So they just avoided thinking about it in order to keep their lives going, their homes going.
So we will come to the characters in your book, and I mean, of course, with Farzana as the central character, it's fascinating what you have put together as a human story. Before that, you write, this whole issue of landfill going back 122 years when initially the Deonar landfill, which was on the outskirts of the city, was a response to the plague of 1896. You write that it was thought that by this method of basically sending these things to a landfill, a large area of waste and unhealthy swamp could be converted into fruitful agricultural land over time. So the question I have is, this utopia of landfill conversion into something beautiful that hasn't changed in over 100 years. Even today, across cities in India, we are sold that dream that this landfill over time will actually be worthwhile. So the question is, will the powers that be, typically the municipality and the state government, will they say whatever it takes to rationalize their decision of the moment? Because even in your book, and we will come to the court cases and the shifting, closing down of the mountain and opening a landfill elsewhere, there are promises and assurances made, and hardly any of them are realized. Is this the order of the day, that the powers that be will say whatever it takes to keep what they have in mind going? Saumya?
As you know, this was made 122 years ago. The idea was that at that point, our waste was mostly organic food waste. And so this would actually be, this would fertilize the land, which could then be used for farming. And it would be a kind of almost a profit-making scheme. And in that sense, if you see, things have not changed. So two things have happened. One, that I think they thought they could look away. Nobody wants to look at waste, right? It's going somewhere where we can't see it, we can't smell it. 100 years later, when they turn around, the problem is of a totally different magnitude, right? If there's 16 million metric tons of waste, like, where do you take it? So I do understand that this is not an easy problem to deal with from an administrative perspective, that, maybe for so many years, not so much effort or attention was given to this. And now when you turn back, it's just immense. And where do you take it? What do you do? So that's for sure. Secondly, I think this idea that existed then, that, oh, this waste can be gold. Often when I speak to people in the waste management space, they'll often tell you about how waste can be gold. And often when I talk about this, I'll get emails after that saying, hey, you don't know, we have this scheme to turn waste into gold. I certainly am not a scientist, and I have no means of denying that. But what I can say from my experience of researching this book only is that waste removal and management is a public good. And so the city administrations do seem, I would say, have a role, whether or not they can make a profit off of waste. Managing it is just one of the most important aspects of maintaining health and growth in the city from both perspectives. One, from those who live in the city, and those who live around where the waste arrives. So often, when we see civic activism around waste, it is from, the wealthier parts of the city that send the waste. Hey, this is unseemly, it stinks, it smells, can you get it out of here? But then we don't think about where it goes. And even the municipality is under not so much pressure to do something with it once it reaches somewhere, which is why then you see these garbage mountains just rising and rising and rising in places where people can't really say anything or do anything about it, where waste pickers live and poor people just live off of it. And they can't say, hey, this is sickening us. They're not so much of a constituency as those from where the waste is coming.
So in fact, my own view of having spoken to people who know more on this whole waste management, the answer clearly seems to lie somewhere in between, where we need to decentralize our waste collection and processing. What happens in Vegas needs to stay in Vegas. And over a period of time, I think not more than 15% of our collective waste should end up in the landfills, because currently our landfill is more a mixed waste kind of handling process, and more transport contractors transporting this mixed waste over a longer distance. But that is for another discussion. Coming back to your book, I found a very interesting bit of trivia. You mentioned that your research has shown that when Deonar was set up in the early years, you had these kachara trains that were taking the garbage to Deonar. So did you discover why they were using trains? When did the process of taking garbage through trains stop in Bombay?
You don't actually hear about the trains a lot. I've lived in Bombay for so many decades and I'd never heard about kachra trains. Until one day I was in the dumping ground and Vita Bai, who is a waste picker, told me, Kachra train nahi aaycha. Like, she was trying to tell me how amazing this place was, the waste landfill. And she says, do you know waste came by train? And I was like, what are you talking about, right? And it so happened that some months after that, I was at Oxford University's Bodleian Library and I was looking for some records for how old this landfill is. Now they say that it was made in 1927, but those records show that it was actually made in 1896, at which point they wanted the waste as far away from the city as possible. And so they made a train line that would take the waste. At that point, the garbage dump was in Mahalakshmi, which, as you might know, is now right in the middle of the city, like it's in South Bombay, very highly urban, residential, commercial area. And so they thought that, oh, the waste is bringing rats and flies and mosquitoes and, a lack of hygiene and illness into the city, into homes. So, like, how far can we send it and how quickly can we get it there, right? So that's where they made this train line, which was called the Kachra Railway. And that is how waste began going there. And once I found the documents and I began asking people around the city, then lots of people said, oh, yeah, of course, I remember it. I remember it. So it seems to have been running until the 1970s, maybe the mid 1970s. So certainly people who lived around the tracks in Jembur, Kurla, etc., remembered that, yeah, in the morning the train would come, and in the evening I was a child, like many. In fact, funnily, many BMC officers, engineers said, yeah, I remember it as a child. Later, of course, as it was supplemented also by trucks. But many of them remembered that as a child, I remember this smelly train going past my house. So yeah, I think it ran until the mid 70s.
Okay. In fact, you mentioned the Mahalakshmi landfill. Mahalakshmi, Parel, and those areas are increasingly getting gentrified now in Bombay. And I guess we will see a future day when even Deonar gets gentrified. Now, coming back to your book, there are some names that stayed with me from your writing, and we will come to them. Farzana, clearly, her brother Jahangir, Muharram Ali and Yasmin, Judge Oka, Nadeem, and of course, the mountain from which there is no escaping. The mountain that we said is 18 floors high. So let's just start with the mountain before we come to the individual characters. Your passages bring alive. I mean, I could almost smell the stench. I could visualize the fires and feel the heat. I could be worried about the potential for landslides that could happen in the mountains through your writing. The toxic health effects, and I think at one stage you mentioned that the average life expectancy in that area is 39 years. The harsh pinpricks, the conditions, the needles, the medical needles, the shards of glass, the dangerous terrain, the families that live off it, the bodies that turn up in the landfill. In fact, your book starts with the 3 fetuses that Farzana finds. The daily risk for the pickers from the guards, the municipality actions, the court cases, and the like. And of course, you have the bulldozer, which is very much in the news these days, but you have a bulldozer which is a risk to the people working out there. So now you've been in this area for over 6 to 8 years. You have actually walked the mountains. Give us a sense of what it is like to be a part of that community.
I should just preface it by saying that I'm not in that sense a part of the community, in that I don't live there and I'm not a waste picker or something like that. I would say that it was one of the most enriching experiences of my life to be there, because you see how life and light can exist, can be carved out of what you think would be one of the darkest places in the world. Like, I remember when I began to write, some of my writer friends would say, Saumya, the place should just stink. It should smell. You should feel the smell, like you mentioned, which was true. It did smell a little bit. It didn't look so great. It smelled not as bad as I thought it would smell, but it certainly was not a very pretty sight. It was not a very pleasant experience, obviously, to be walking on a landfill. But by the same token, when you asked the waste pickers about their life on the garbage mountain, it was clear that their lives were completely enmeshed and intertwined with the garbage mountain. But when you spoke to them, because their life was there, a person's life is a person's life. And so it's full of also happy memories. It's full of their enterprise, their gumption, their crazy money making, schemes that work or don't work, but their courage, their gumption to have these and to carve a life out of literally nothing was just tremendous. And so what drew me to this book is that very tight intertwining between life and death, light and darkness, light and dark. And so to that extent, it was a very intense experience of life that you were seeing, the edge of human experience.
I must credit you. I mean, you really brought that whole, especially for urban, middle class, and well to do dwellers, like most of the listeners of this podcast. I think reading your book will give them a sense of what it is like to be in those kind of conditions. And as you mentioned earlier, they're still happy. I mean, they're still cheerful despite what we would think would be a tortuous existence. It's, in a sense, makes the invisible visible reading your book. Moving on to institutions, Saumya, I mean, there is, of course, the operator which had the license for the landfill Tatwa, which is a firm. There is the Bombay Municipal Corporation, and there is the courts. And you clearly mentioned, the fires that raged in Deonar. Suddenly, the rest of the city woke up and realized that there was this mountain in Deonar built out of their waste, and it was now wafting into their houses and their own comfort chambers. And the court stepped in, they stopped construction in Mumbai. So suddenly it started affecting everyone. And you have attended a lot of the court case hearings and the like. So give us a sense in terms of what happened as a result of those fires, the intervention of the court, the promises of the corporation, and also the role played by Judge Oka, who subsequently came on to be the Chief Justice of the Karnataka High Court. Give us a sense of that whole experience that you had and the community felt during those days.
In January 2016 onwards, there were fires at the dumping ground. Landfill fires are known for releasing a lot of smoke. There were flames, but the smoke was just like epic. It was rising, it was really high, it was captured by NASA satellite pictures. And it was then not only in Deonar, it was all over the city. And so people on the far edge of the city who were living in high-rise buildings, etc., were inhaling this toxic smoke, and it was causing asthma. And, it was like this halo, like this translucent white halo over the city. And so this impermeable wall that it existed in earlier, oh, our waste is going somewhere, we can't see it, we can't smell it, so let's keep sending stuff there. It was as if that impermeable wall had suddenly been broken because the smoke was coming, it was smelling, it was stinking, right? And so Sharmaji's PIL, which had just been filed a few weeks before, came up for hearing. Justice Oak then banned all construction in the city because you could say that literally this issue had become heated again. There was concern about this, right? Like a lot of people I would meet would say, okay, I get everything, but then I want my child to be breathing clean air. I want them to be not growing up with this kind of toxic smoke. I can't be taking them to the doctor all the time. So it began affecting people who thought that this whole time they had nothing to do with this, but actually they did. And so there was public outrage and interest, concern about doing something about this. Justice Oak then banned fresh construction in the city, saying, hey, if we can't manage waste, let's not have more construction, homes, waste getting produced. Which you could say is the connection could be a somewhat tenuous one, but not entirely unrelated. And so I thought, oh, wow, like, let me go see what's happening here. So I began going to court, and I had barely ever been to a court before. And there was that heat in the issue. He was constantly setting deadlines. He was constantly asking for the closure of the dumping ground. And it seemed to me then at that point that, oh my God, this place is going to close down any day. And I would worry that what would happen to our waste pickers. I began going, and every time I would go, I would ask the waste pickers, so now, is it closing down? Is it closing down? And they would say, nahi, madam, ye to hamare bachpan se case chal raha hai. Like, this has been going on since we were kids. Don't worry about it. So I was like, So I actually began to file right to information requests, which became a whole saga in itself. But in the end, I was able to obtain case papers going back 26 years. And if you see the papers, you see that there is a similar kind of sound and fury over 26 years. Many well-known judges have presided over this. And you get that sense of something is going to happen, deadlines are being set, and there was a contempt petition. So you feel that something is going to happen, which I suspect happens in many cases. But in the end, what is the tool that the judiciary has? It is sometimes to create the sound and fury, right? So for years, it seemed that something would happen, but the place had only grown.
So through it all, I mean, despite all the sound and fury, as you say, the place kept growing. The municipality kept making promises. There was talk of waste to energy, and there is no successful example of waste to energy cases in this country at this scale. But they were made as it's around the corner, and it never came. And the interesting thing I got from the writing, as civil society, you believe that closing down that mound of biomining and reducing it to something manageable is the right thing to do by the community and everyone else. But at the same time, the community that depends on the mountain for its livelihood actually wanted to continue because that is the source of the livelihood. Am I right in my reading of the situation?
Yeah, they absolutely wanted it to continue. They wanted to continue working there. And that actually made me think a lot, because I felt that in my writing, I don't want to be an apologist for that lifestyle or romanticize it and say, hey, they should be waste pickers in perpetuity living this kind of a life. So while certainly they, even today, many of the characters in this book continue to be waste pickers or kind of working around that landfill, as in, pretty much every day. So many of them are working there every day, living there every day, even now. But I certainly, as a writer, didn't feel that I should be careful to kind of romanticize it, because we had some of them were like third generation waste pickers. So would we say that generationally, even their children, like, would I want Farzana's children to continue to be waste pickers? Is that what I want to say in my book? I'm not sure. While I don't say that their life was, a waste in quotes, literally, but by the same token, I don't want to say that this is my hope for Farzana's child or her grandchildren, as her father and, some of them, their grandparents have done this. So, that was not my hope for them. But is that what they wanted? Yes. As you know, the solid waste rules say that waste pickers are to be integrated in the waste management systems of the city. And certainly, I do believe that there have to be more humane ways in which we can include waste pickers in the waste management systems of the city.
I completely agree with you, Soumya. And that integration, I feel, should happen at more the decentralized level. And the humane way to do it is in the early part of the chain over the end part of the chain on waste management. Now, moving on to the human stories, I kept that for the end. These are true stories. And I want our listeners to actually go out and buy the book and read them. But to just give you a sense, I mean, the central character really is Farzana, who all her life has known the mountain. In fact, she's the oldest among the children, Hyder Ali's children, who was born when they had already moved to the base of the mountain. So tell us something about did it happen by chance, or as you were researching and collecting, that Farzana really emerges in more ways than one as the central protagonist of your entire book and the anchor of your entire story? So, did it happen by serendipity or design, Saumya?
Yeah, so I avoided it for a while. We used to lend to many waste pickers there. And even as I began researching, thinking of writing at first a magazine article and then a book, I thought it would be about Vitabai and Salma. Later, I thought it would be about Muharram Ali. And I would keep meeting Hyder Ali and Farzana. But she was always there. But she's not very verbal. And she was also young at the time, like 15 and 16 and 17 years old. And not at all verbal. As you know, teenagers, like, it's never easy to talk to teenagers, right? Moody, quiet, but always there. But over a period of time, although I was interviewing the other characters and, spending time with them, it just became increasingly clear to me that the story was about Farzana. And slowly it became clear to her that we would have to find a way of communicating with each other. And slowly we became friends. And slowly she began to find ways, sometimes in the most surprising times, like we would go out to a doctor's appointment or to have lunch, and suddenly she would remember something about her childhood on the landfill. She would remember vividly happy moments or very traumatic moments. We would be having lunch in a restaurant and she would remember moments that had been so traumatic for her. The reason that then it had to be about her was that it was clear that the arc of her life mirrored the garbage landfill, because she had been born there, she learned to walk there, she found her first toys there, she became a teenager there. And while she was not very verbal, she had a tremendous energy, relentless energy. to like pick waste. That whole treasure seeking aspect of waste pickers' lives was completely there in her. Like I write in the book that when waste trucks would come, there would be this race to get to them. And she would actually clamber onto a waste truck even before it stopped, get on it, pick the best stuff from the waste, and throw it to her, sisters before the others could get to it. So she didn't even wait for the truck to stop. So although she was not verbal, that was the kind of energy, infectious energy and joy that she was bringing to this place that was quite, coming through and infectious. And very quickly, with my own eyes, I was seeing the tremendous trauma that she had gone through. And as I was reporting the book, I saw her snatching life out of that place that was death itself.
In fact, it's a coming of age story through Farzana, I think from the age of 10 to 18 that you capture, and subsequently the trauma that she undergoes. So it has all elements of life at the base of the mountain. And I once again urge our listeners to go out and buy the book, because it's just worth buying it to understand what Farzana's life was like in this whole story. Just moving on. So you also have Farzana's brother Jahangir, and there's a sub story about the gangs, the concerned brother who is ready to spend all his money on her sister's medical treatment when it is required. And it has a sub story, and not only about Jahangir, but even in respect of others, that suddenly all the money that they have saved, and which is quite meager in the first place, is suddenly consumed in emergencies that arise. So, as someone who's been in the microfinance area, is this very common to the sector that people strive, they save for a better life, and suddenly there are exigencies which cause them to lose all their savings?
Yeah, I would say that's certainly one of my learnings from my own personal learnings from working in the microfinance sector. One of my greatest learnings has been to see the fragility of the lives of the poor. It's not that they don't ever run a profitable business. There were so many occasions when I saw waste pickers, or not only waste pickers, but a range of our borrowers, some of whom may be doing tailoring, running a street vending fruit business or something like that, making street food or selling fruits or vegetables. At some point, they may make money, use loans, use something and make some money. But oftentimes there'll be a health emergency, there'll be an education, expense that they need to make, as a result of which these things do get wiped out. So we think of the poor as the poor, but actually they do go through these kind of cycles of, having made an effort. They would often present business plans to us that we are going to use this to, say, rent a shop, buy a fridge, or some wonderful asset like that. But actually asset creation for the poor, durable assets or savings, are difficult for the poor because of the fragility of their lives, not having enough of a social safety net. Many times a health emergency will just wipe out savings. I certainly saw this many times in many different professions.
The other thing that Jahangir's story also brings to light, in a sense, is also the Khan gang, the mafia, in a sense, that is there, and also dispensing local justice. So could you talk to that?
Yeah, sure. When the fires came in 2016, police cases were made out against the gangs. And even now, just last week, I was telling someone about my book and they said, oh my God, like there are so many gangs. Deonar was known for its gangs. But I met them. I don't take away. They may or may not have lit the fires. I certainly don't say that they played a very wonderful role there or anything. But by the same token, the only thing I will say is that they were also trying to fill a gap in administration. They were also symbolic of that. There are all kinds of police cases made out against them, including appropriating the waste dump, physically just taking parts of it away, breaking down the boundary wall, bringing illegal waste there, which also causes health hazards, bringing in cement so that gets mixed up with waste. So now incinerating waste becomes very difficult when there's concrete, cement mixed into it, metal mixed into it. There are even cases of intimidation, and we see Jahangir himself being intimidated by gangs when he was young. And so the only way for him to survive is by joining a gang. Either you are part of them or they abuse you. There's no other way to survive as a young boy on the dumping ground. but they are also symbolic of the sort of the little lack of administration that these places were kind of loosely administered. Certainly, the level of civic attention that we receive in wealthy areas is not what is received there. And so they thought that they were filling that. And that gave them the license, probably, they thought, to also extend violence.
See, you profile 4 families. Another interesting one I felt was, Muharram Ali and Yasmin. And this thing about, that first necklace find, which she subsequently says that has been the most unlucky find of them all. And also a family in perpetual debt. Is that also quite common, this business about more loans to fix earlier loans and the cycle just continues?
Yeah, you were asking me earlier, and we were discussing like this, the fragility of the lives of the poor, that constant dream that if they take one more loan, they can do something. If they take one more loan, then they can rise from poverty. And in a sense, as someone working in that field, that was also my dream, right? That, oh, I'm just going to give them a small loan and their life is going to completely transform. With Muharram Ali, he was extremely charismatic. We would talk often and we had a nice relationship. He also dreamt that his life would get better. And my dream for him also was that, oh my God, he's going to do so much. He's going to be rise to the middle class, as I write in the book. It ended with him, as you know, just piling up loans, taking one loan to repay another one. Then when someone would come for that loan, he would take another loan and repay this loan. And in the end, they were just in a huge, tremendous crisis. Like today, I don't even know where he is.
And that really was a spoiler alert. The other thing, of course, is, you finally have Nadeem, and there's also love angles and love among these kind of mountains and this space. It's very, very touching. So as we come to a close, Saumya, you also mentioned in your acknowledgement, you mentioned a place which is close to our heart at BIC. You said this whole thing started with the residency at Sangam House. So can you talk about the whole writing process and how this kind of residency got you started? And as you wrote the book, the kind of conversations that you had with fellow authors, your editors and the like, how did this book finally take shape?
Yeah, I don't think I would have been able to write the book without actually going to Sangam House and then the other residencies that I went to. I was running this microfinance on a daily basis, and I had completely stopped writing. Although I have trained and worked as a journalist for more than a decade, but when I was running this microfinance, this was the kind of stuff that we would see every day that would keep your brain just, occupied, busy. And, I never had the space to write. And so I remember through a friend of mine writing to Arshia saying, I have this thought that if you remember, there were fires just a few months before at Deonar, and I would like to write something about these waste pickers who I've known for a long time. And Arshia, who runs this fellowship, was extremely, warm and welcoming and said, yeah, sure, we can give you a couple of weeks. And at that point, I remember it was literally the last weeks of December 2016. And at that point, it felt to me like, 2 weeks, what am I going to do? I went to Sangam House and I could feel my, mind slowing down. You see a lot of things in Deonar and elsewhere, as Mumbai, Bangalore, they are really, hyperkinetic cities, as I call them. But to process and to write about them, what does this mean for poverty, for our life today? These were things that when you are sitting in a writing residency in Sangam House, I began just writing down literally like a diary. What was their life? What was Hyder Ali's life, Muharram Ali's life, Itabai Salman's life like? What did they go through? How did they find the strength to overcome these things? So many occasions when I feel like, Ravi, even people like you and me would have given up. How did they find the strength in them to keep going? So many things like this. I think that writing residencies allow you to process, to think. And while this place may not be an easy place, your writing must reflect sometimes the grace, the strength, the beauty in these characters that does exist in the midst of the darkness that you can just visibly see around you.
And I think you have achieved that very well, Saumya. So folks, Mountain Tales by Saumya Roy, please do buy it wherever you get your books, online or in bookshops. It'll give you a peek into the lives of the invisibles, the things that we take for granted, the ones we do not even realize exist, and they all survive on our wasteful habits. Thank you, Saumya, for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me, Ravi. It was an absolute pleasure to be speaking to you about this because I know you have engaged with so many of these issues for so long. It was just really wonderful to be speaking to you.
Thank you for staying on for the full conversation. If you liked what you heard, please share it with family and friends. You can also leave us a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. The crew that makes these podcasts possible are Gaurav Krishna and Ishan Gupta on sound supervision and production, with support from S. Sarvanaraj and Raghavendra Tenkaila. Artwork and design is by Chandani Venkataraman of Crisscross Design Studios. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. It can also be accessed on our website, bangaloreinternationalcenter.org. Do follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to get regular updates on our programming. This is Lekha Naidu signing off on behalf of everyone at BIC.